Well, the ANC is welcoming Justice Minister Michael Masutha's plans to assist arrested Fees Must Fall activists. They have been protesting outside the union buildings. To unpack this, we're now joined by the party's Fasiha Hassan. Good evening, Fasiha. Thank you very much for your time. Well, first of all, and just going back to your reaction to what happened at the Tswana University of Technology's Soshanguve campus. I don't know if you saw the deputy minister in a clip we played earlier saying, what were police doing with R5 rifles on campus?
Exactly. I think the first reaction is that of shock. We hold very strong views on the issue of militarization of our campuses. Police should never be using lethal weapons at institutions of higher learning. So I think that's the first main issue. But of course, for us also to have a formal investigation. We need to find out what actually happened. Why would police be coming in onto campus and using live ammunition? This is a person, an entire human being, a young person who's lost their lives. So obviously condolences to the family as a number one. But for us, we're also very interested in understanding why. Why would police come onto campus with live ammunition and lethal force? So to allow IPID to complete its due process, but also to condemn in the strongest terms the use of lethal force for students who essentially they don't have anything to fight back with.
Well, I want to ask you to answer or try and answer the question, the very question that you posed. Why do police go in to campuses carrying R5 rifles? What is your analysis?
I think that police would often say, there's this idea of measuring the kind of force that's required. And I think this is actually where we need to interrogate what's going on. Is the force that's been used by police necessary for what was actually happening? And that's something that I think we need to be very clear on.
But is it? What is your view?
We must allow the investigative process to go through. Of course,
rifle?
It's ridiculous. It's dramatic. It is very dramatic. But we must allow IPID to do its work. We must allow it to investigate. But we're very clear on the issue of lethal weapons. There should be no lethal weapons on campus. That's definitely the position.
Now, you have the Fees Must Fall student activists saying they want amnesty for all the activists. You have Michael Masutha saying they're going to try and help, but not really promising anything. What's your view? What do you think should happen?
Given that there's been this intervention by the Ministry of Justice and Correctional Services, we understand there's a need to work within a constitutional framework. And also understanding that it's not a blanket approach for the 547 students, some of which will qualify for presidential pardon, some of which cannot. So I think that's what we really mean when we talk about that constitutional process. Does it mean we approach the NPA? Does it mean we approach the president? So that's the first element of how it should be dealt with. But of course, we also need to be clear in understanding that many students over the last, not just the last 2 or 3 years, but for many years, have put their lives on the line and their bodies on the line in the fight for free education. And you'll know that the ANC in its founding documents, and in fact, since its very inception, actually brought about the idea of free education. So I think we also need to understand it within that context of where that call comes from.
But there is perhaps another context that we should understand and that is your party's inconsistencies in actually dealing with this issue. You had students being led by other organizations, for example. There were other organizations that were at the forefront, of the Fees Must Fall movement. And at times, your student formations were ambivalent, about the whole thing. Secondly, when appeals were made to government seemed, non-responsive. And then guess what? Jacob Zuma comes up and says, we're going to give you, we have money for free education. So how much responsibility do you think your ANC and its allied organizations, should take
I'm actually
in not
very
showing
glad
leadership?
That the question came up. I think the first thing, and I have the benefit of having been in the student movement, and the fact that we have a non-partisan student movement. Fees Must Fall in its very nature is non-partisan. So to say that it's only one political party and not another is factually not necessarily correct. But I think the point here that we need to put across.
Who took the leadership?
I think the point here of what we need to put across, though, is the idea that when the student movement said to political parties, because we saw this, when political parties attempted to enter, there was this consensus from students to say, give us the space to actually push for free education. And in many ways, the ANC did take a step back in that regard. But we must also understand the difference between the ANC and the ANC in its state as the actual government. And I think when you understand it separately, you then begin to see the different or the multi-pronged approach, because there's the ANC in its political party approach, which we know about, but then we also saw, like you said, former President Jacob Zuma in his announcement of free education. I think that the student movement needed to do some work for that political will to come about, but it was definitely part of the work that came from the ANC. So I think what we must do is actually look at it holistically, look at the different roles that each player had to play and the contributions towards free education. But what we must be very clear on is that it wasn't just by work of the government or just by work of the ANC. I think it was, like I said, this holistic approach.
Do you want to comment on what's happening at Nelson Mandela Bay as we speak?
So to our knowledge, we've just witnessed the removal of the former Mayor Athol Trollip.
Which the ANC supported.
Exactly. The African National Congress was in support of, as well as other political parties. And I think it's also a very interesting example of how these coalitions seem to be working quite well together. So good luck to the comrades there.
Okay.